All right, welcome back to the Canadian Research Security Weekly Roundup. It is Friday, March 20th, and we've got a lot to cover. We're tracking the biggest stories out there for Canadian researchers, so let's just dive right in.
Okay, first up on the radar this week is China's Belt and Road Initiative. The massive global infrastructure project actually reaching the Canadian Arctic? Yeah, a new report is dropping, and it's raising some pretty tough questions about foreign investment and what it could mean for sovereignty way up north.
So what's the real deal here? Well, critics are basically sounding the alarm. They're arguing that because there hasn't been enough consistent support from the federal government, Inuit communities are being left in a vulnerable spot. And that, in turn, could be creating an open door for foreign influence.
And this really gets to the heart of the problem. A report from the China Strategic Risks Institute points to a pretty critical gap. You see, communities often just don't have the resources to properly check out these really complex investment proposals for things like mining or new infrastructure. I mean, on the surface, these deals can look amazing, right? But they come with a huge risk: long-term economic dependence. And that's a pattern we've seen with China's Belt and Road Initiative all over the world.
But here's the thing. Inuit leaders aren't just sitting back and pointing out the problem. Nope. They're coming forward with a really clear solution. What they're calling for is a real, meaningful partnership with Ottawa, one that's actually built on sharing better intelligence so everyone understands the risks and putting stronger regulations in place to manage them effectively.
Okay, so while navigating all those risks is absolutely critical, this week has also been packed with some seriously incredible news about the power of Canadian innovation. So let's shift gears and look at some of the huge wins and investments that are really going to make a massive impact.
First on that list, let's talk about what might honestly be one of Canada's best-kept secrets when it comes to AI. I'm talking about the Vision and Image Processing Group, or VIP, over at the University of Waterloo. People are starting to call them an understated powerhouse in the AI world, and for good reason.
And just look at their impact. It's incredible. We're talking more than 10 spin-off companies, hundreds of highly trained researchers, and the work they're doing? It's tackling huge, real-world problems. Everything from monitoring Arctic ice, hey, that brings us right back to our first story, doesn't it? To developing AI for better nutrition. But what's really key here is their focus on responsible and trustworthy AI. Building systems that are fair, transparent, and secure right from the get-go. And that is what makes them a true Canadian innovation engine.
All right, let's get to some big numbers. Because wow, the funding news this week is just massive. Let's start with this one. Over $500 million from the Canada Foundation for Innovation. And look, this isn't just a number on a page. This is a huge boost to upgrade labs and get new equipment for 92 different projects all across the country. We're talking everything from life sciences to quantum tech.
And the big investments, they just keep coming. Ottawa's also dropping $200 million for a sovereign space launch pad out in Nova Scotia. And the why on this one is so important. It's all about depending less on the US and giving Canada our own independent access to space. That is a vital move for our economy and for our national security. And get this, that launch pad is supposed to be up and running by 2028.
And one more. This one is kind of a rescue mission, actually. This $13.5 million is an absolutely critical lifeline for Canada's National Neutron Beam Research Program at McMaster. This program was right on the brink of collapsing. So this funding, it makes sure our researchers will still have access to this world-class facility to make breakthroughs in things like clean energy and health. Huge sigh of relief on that one.
Okay, so all this money, all this investment in amazing, cutting-edge research, it naturally brings up a really critical question. It's one that Canada, and frankly all of our allies, are struggling with right now. In a world with such fierce competition, how in the world do you balance open global collaboration with the need to protect your own national interests? It is an incredibly delicate balancing act.
And this slide just nails the core dilemma perfectly. It's like two sides of the same coin. On one side, you've got the whole point of science, right? Open collaboration, working together to solve the world's biggest challenges. But on the other side, you've got the risk. Unwanted knowledge transfer, people exploiting dual-use technologies. That's tech that can be used for both civilian and military purposes, and at the end of the day, it could undermine our own strategic advantage.
And look, this isn't just some theory we're talking about. A recent report from Bloomberg shows just how deep the research ties are getting between European universities and Chinese institutions that are linked to the government and the military. And here's the really alarming part. Some of these partnerships are with universities from what's known as China's 7 Sons of National Defense. We're talking about a group of universities with deep ties to the Chinese military. So yeah, that raises some pretty obvious security concerns.
And we're seeing a really similar dynamic playing out down in New Zealand. A new report there highlights that students from China now make up more than a third of all their international students. Now, of course, that brings huge economic and cultural benefits. Nobody's denying that. But the report is really urging a careful, well-thought-out approach, one that balances all that great openness with the safeguards you need to protect sensitive research.
So this tension, this constant push and pull between collaboration and security, it's fueling an absolutely fierce global race for technological dominance. All around the world, you see nations placing these huge, massive bets on the strategic technologies they think are going to define the future. I mean, just look at the UK. They are going all in on quantum, pouring £2 billion into a national initiative. And their goal? It is incredibly ambitious. They want to be the very first country to deploy large-scale quantum computers. The kind of tech that could totally revolutionize, well, everything, from healthcare to defense.
And then you have South Korea. They're also making a massive play, investing 8.6 trillion won to fast-track their key strategic technologies. But what's really interesting is that their plan is also designed to strengthen their technology security framework at the very same time. They're tackling both sides of that coin.
And not to be left out, the EU is betting big on nuclear research. They're putting 330 million euros into it, all to push for energy independence and meet their climate goals. A big piece of that is focusing on the future of fusion energy. When you see all this massive global investment, it really makes you wonder, right? How does Canada's own strategies stack up on the world stage?
But the threats we're facing, they aren't just about direct collaboration anymore. Things are getting more complicated. So, in our final section, let's look at some of the new, more subtle vulnerabilities that are starting to pop up. These are the kinds of threats that demand a whole new level of vigilance.
Okay, and this next threat is, well, it's pretty fascinating and a little scary. Officials in the UK are getting really concerned about a tactic they call the mosaic effect. So here's how it works. An adversary files dozens of what look like totally harmless freedom of information requests. They send them to all sorts of places, universities, government ministries, you name it. Now, each little piece of data they get back is unclassified. It's just public info. But when they take all those tiny little pieces and start putting them together, like a mosaic, they can potentially build a picture that reveals classified intelligence about the UK's defense capabilities. It's clever, and it's a real worry.
And finally, let's just zoom all the way out to a global trend that honestly sits underneath all of these other challenges. There's a new report out, and it paints a pretty disturbing picture. It finds that academic freedom, the absolute foundation of open inquiry and research, has actually declined in 50 different countries just since 2015.
And this chart here from the Academic Freedom Index, it really shows you what's happening. That bar for countries with high academic freedom, it's shrinking. And the bar for countries where freedom is declining, it's getting bigger. This kind of erosion, which is often driven by political pressure, just creates a tougher, more restrictive world for researchers everywhere. It has a real impact on who we can safely work with and on the very nature of what open science even means.
So, what's the big takeaway from all this? I think it's that we're living in a time of paradox. We're seeing these massive, historic investments in innovation right at the same time that geopolitical tensions are rising and academic freedom is shrinking. That creates a really defining challenge for every single researcher out there, not just in Canada, but all over the world. And it leaves us with the critical question for the years ahead. As this global competition just gets more and more intense, what is the future of open science? That's what we've got for this week's Roundup. Thanks for tuning in.